Thank you for the introduction. I'll just, get right into it. My name is Jules Utaba. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior attorney for the National Health Law Program. And this is just a brief presentation on some of our work and how it overlaps with LAAC, where in fact the National Health Law Program is one of the, is a LAAC member. So I think we've worked together before in the past, and here are some sort of ideas, the kind of work we do, so how we can work together in the future. So the National Health Law Program, I'll use the acronym NHeLP, is a nonprofit law firm that protects and advances the health rights of low-income and underserved individuals and families across the United States, but we do have specific dedicated office in California. We work with state and local partners as well as national partners to advance healthcare rights. And then we have about, I would say, 50 people spread pretty evenly across our three offices, based in LA, in California, DC, and North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And the work that we do in each office, I can kind of explain in more detail later, but California is a mix of sort of everything. In DC, it is policy focused, I would say, so mostly on legislation and changing the law and working with legislators to change the law. And then our North Carolina office deals with a lot more litigation and sort of making the same sort of changes, but in court. And like I mentioned, the California office does both policy and legislation, so it's a mix. I'll read NHeLP's mission here. NHeLP protects and advances the health rights of low-income and underserved individuals to access high-quality healthcare. NHeLP advocates, educates, and litigates at the federal and state levels to preserve these rights. And we stand up for the rights of millions of people who struggle to access affordable, quality healthcare. Similarly, we have an equity stance, and I'll read part of it here. The full equity stance is linked there. I'm assuming these slides will be sent out, so there's quite a few resources and links throughout that are going to be shared. I think the main part of our health equity stance is the first paragraph there, that I think a lot of people are aware of the social and economic disparities in health outcomes. And our goal here is to continuously examine healthcare systems and advocate for laws and health policies that counteract structural barriers, institutional power dynamics, and examples of overt and implicit bias that create health inequity. And again, just going back to the first part, it's something that I've seen a lot in my work are different outcomes based on race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, class, income, among other characteristics. And especially true recently in the pandemic, I think it became more pronounced and evident. So I'll describe NHeLP nationally and then get into sort of our California work and then our sub-teams in California. I mentioned that nationally, the focus is on policy and litigation. So policy being legislation, changing rules and laws through that system versus litigation and using the judicial and court system to preserve or protect a right or clarify individuals' healthcare rights. And then I listed a few of the acts and laws that we rely on. I think most often it's going to be the Medicaid Act. And then that last bullet point sort of expresses what I'm trying to say, which is our expertise is in strengthening Medicaid. And I think that's sort of how we're known. And then some of our most significant products are related to explaining Medicaid rules. And I provide a link at the very end to our Medicaid guide, which is been updated. So for the first time in probably 10 years, it's being updated, which is a big change, a lot of changes and updates there. I wanted to include a few litigation highlights that we had. So these are, I mentioned that we are a national organization, but these ones that I've picked out are all California related or originated in California. The first is a case called KDA, which improves the standards or at least requires some sense of standardization or uniformity in terms of data monitoring to see if youth have access to mental health services. And the KDA settlement helps detect compliance and monitor whether or not plans are in compliance with the law. Again, there's Rivera, a significant case, especially for those who offer direct services to Medi-Cal enrollees and applicants. It's a rule that allows for an applicant to receive Medi-Cal services while other parts of their eligibility are being verified or still under determination. So there, the administrative burden doesn't fall on individuals. They can still access care while things are pending. And then another one that I included was just medical record access. And those are cases where we were direct representatives or partnered with other organizations to represent a client. And that in terms of litigation, we also offer support for attorneys. So we might not necessarily be directly representing, but it's more like consultation for whether it's going to court or an administrative action or arbitration. And then another form of litigation support that we offer are amicus briefs. So for those unfamiliar with that term, it just means another filing. So this is a filing at court, but NHeLP is not directly representing an individual in the case. It's sort of like supplementing the record and offering something to the court or judge to explain the rule. And usually there is a position being advocated for, but the only difference is that we're not directly representing an individual. And then I provided an example there where mental health care services were being denied, wrongfully denied, and this WIT case helped ensure access to mental healthcare services. So that was a bit on our national team. And then these teams overlap quite a bit. As you can imagine, those cases were all California-based cases. So we do have California-based attorneys who work nationally and vice versa. So there's a lot of overlap between our offices. But our California office, nevertheless, myself, I actually don't do that much national work. I focus a lot on Medi-Cal and advocacy in California. So similar to our national mission, it's ensuring access to low-income and underserved Californians to get comprehensive healthcare coverage and services. And similarly to national, our expertise is in Medicaid or Medi-Cal, as it's called in California, but we also include more private plans under covered California. So I think it's more broad in California. If you're looking to ask questions, it's not sort of restricted to Medi-Cal. And then similar to being part of LAAC, a coalition, NHeLP is part of the Health Consumer Alliance, or the HCA. And there are about a dozen direct services providers, I shouldn't say providers, legal organizations who do the direct representation and sort of retainer of clients. And then we, along with two other organizations, offer consultation and technical support. And I'll explain a bit more about that HCA Health Consumer Alliance in a little bit. I left that towards the end. So back to NHeLP and our California office, we have 5 subgroups, subdivisions of our California office. And again, it gets kind of confusing. I don't want to spend too much detail on our organizational structure because this overlaps nationally and yeah, things like that. So I don't think it's necessary to get into the structure, but I will go through each one individually so you have an idea of what these mean. Eligibility and enrollment is where I do most of my work. It is to improve and expand Medi-Cal and coverage and affordability, not only in Medi-Cal, but Medicare and Covered California as well. And then I put in a few highlights here, which you may be familiar with, that expanded health access in California. I think a great one that I like to highlight is expansion to healthcare, Medi-Cal expansion, I should say, to all Californians, regardless of immigration status. Just by way of background, I worked previously for a direct service organization that's part of this Health Consumer Alliance. It's also part of LAAC, Legal Aid of San Mateo. And before that, I worked for mental health advocacy services in Los Angeles, which is also part of LAAC. And the vast majority, I would say the majority of clients I've had would have a non-US citizenship status. So I think expanding access to all Californians, regardless of immigration status, is change that I noticed in my work daily. Similarly, expanding access or making it Medi-Cal more affordable in terms of eliminating premiums, monthly premiums that individuals would used to have to pay. Part B buy-in, that last bullet point simply means Medicare has some fairly strict rules as when someone can enroll and join Medicare, and this Part B buy-in makes it easier for folks to join Medicare and enroll in Medicare outside of the regular schedule. And there's a lot of ongoing efforts during Medi-Cal unwinding now that Medi-Cal and Medicaid nationally can be terminated. There was a pause on terminating Medi-Cal, as you know. There's some effort by our organization and a lot of advocates in California and in the United States to make some of these options and flexibilities that were put in place by the federal government to make enrollment and coverage easier for folks, trying to make those options permanent instead of temporary. Another area of work that we have in NHeLP is called delivery systems. These are for systemic issues, so they can be client-based, but they're typically for patterns of problems that we see. So for example, and enforcing those rights for individuals. So continuity of care is something that comes up a lot. So I put an example there that the general rule for continuity of care of individuals who transition between plans, say you go from a private plan through Covered California to a Medi-Cal plan, and the right to see the same doctor, to have similar prescriptions, things of that nature are called continuity of care. So preserving that right is sort of what our delivery systems team would do. And we have about 2 or 3 attorneys dedicated to delivery systems and making sure that plans are in compliance with the law. So by plan, I mean like Blue Shield or Medi-Cal itself. And the same, another example is these are enhanced care management for qualified youth. So there are certain populations that have heightened managed care to match their sort of higher needs. And a lot of the work that our delivery system team does is ensuring that those standards are maintained. So it's a form of consumer protection is how I describe this delivery systems group. But it overlaps a lot with other groups and especially services. I find that when I was providing direct services, for clients. Their issues were often healthcare services and access to services and benefits. So a lot of the work in the California team is in service and ensuring that all these services that have been fought hard for by advocates, like transportation services, gender affirming care services, early screening for children, are all maintained and available, accessible to individuals who have the right to them. And just the last bullet point as well is we also aim to address gaps in coverage because covered services don't always match needs. So a few more teams. There's our sexual and reproductive health team and our disability team are the next two I wanted to mention. And these ones have maybe the most overlap between California and federal. So sexual reproductive health, our SRH team, their three primary tasks are to uphold and expand access to abortion care, contraceptives, and pregnancy coverage. So we're part of a number of coalitions. I put here the Reproductive Freedom Coalition for Reproductive Freedom, and then the California Future of Abortion Council. And then a lot of the work that our SRH team is very proud of is with doula care. I think it's especially significant now because of what I mentioned at the very beginning, our equity stance. A lot of pregnant persons experience disparate outcomes in health, and doula services have been significant in reducing the gaps between ethnicities and other socioeconomic backgrounds. And then another sort of project that our SRH team is proud of is the Contraceptive Equity Act, which is California-based and is now expanding to other states, but it provides access to over-the-counter contraceptives and ensuring coverage for those and accessibility. And then finally, we have our disability rights team, which overlaps with all of our other teams in California and nationally. As you can imagine, most issues related to disability and folks with disability is access to services or some sort of systemic problem. So there's overlap between delivery systems and services and disability, but nonetheless, we have a few attorneys who are dedicated just to this specific population. And then the types of support that we at NHeLP provide, the systemic policy advocacy. So within the HCA, a lot of times we'll have attorneys from different parts of the state bring issues, and it's helpful to group those together and then present those to a plan as a systemic issue and raise the urgency of it or escalate it in some other way. Technical assistance, I think, takes up a huge portion of our work as well. And that is just, it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of systemic being really broad, big issues, and technical assistance. Oftentimes, we're advising an attorney who has a healthcare case but has a very specific question, or it's a rare occurrence. And then using our knowledge and expertise, we find similar cases or the exact specific rule that can help the advocate in that area. So I think those two sort of account for a lot of our work in terms of support to outside organizations, those broad issues and those really specific narrow issues as well. We offer trainings on specific areas and requests are welcome. I mentioned the litigation support, whether it's direct representation, amicus briefs, or consult. There are different types of litigation support that our litigation teams offer. And then a lot of publications and resources. And then I linked to a few of them at the end. And then I would just, again, say that I think the one that the organization is most proud of is the Advocates Medicaid Guide. So I'll highlight that one at the end. And then a bit about the Health Consumer Alliance. Very similar to the role and goals of NHeLP as an organization, but now it is grouped with a network of consumer assistance programs and community-based legal service organizations across California. So we're, again, providing free legal services to all customers in all languages. I should say consumers, sorry. Healthcare consumers. And here's a list of the organizations. So the entire state's covered. LISNIC, Legal Services of Northern California, would take geographically about half of the state, all the northern counties. And then there are a few in the Bay Area, few HCA organizations in the Bay Area, Inland, LA, and San Diego. So the state is covered, and I think it's helpful if advocates have questions to link with a local direct service provider so they can represent directly, so they can represent the individual. And NHeLP, along with Western Center and Justice in Aging, provide systemic advocacy and then technical assistance and sort of support to the direct service providers. So that's more or less everything I had describing our work. And then I have a few resources available. There's my email and our general email, and then contact the HCA. So I would say contacting NHeLP would be for technical assistance, general inquiries, things like that about the law. And then if there is a very urgent issue, or you're unable to represent someone, a particular individual, then I think the HCA would be the better contact there. So here are a few resources. We have our website, which has just been recently updated. And then we have a service guide that I've linked as well. And then this third bullet point, the Advocate's Guide to the Medicaid Program, is a very comprehensive resource that goes into fine detail about Medicaid, so nationally, Medicaid nationally, as opposed to Medi-Cal. But it's very useful, especially for citations to the law and finding similar cases. So for maybe someone who might litigate an issue. We have a variety of different listservs, and you can email NHeLP to join. The ones that we monitor are a confidential California advocates for all healthcare advocates in California. We have a dental listserv, and then a national medical debt listserv. Yeah, that's all I had. I didn't see any questions come up in the chat, so I can sort of stop sharing there and pause, see if there's anyone with a question.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This webinar was hosted by the Legal Aid Association of California, also known as LAAC. We are the membership organization for California's civil legal aid nonprofits. Our job is to advocate in the legislature, in the courts, and with the State Bar of California on behalf of the community of nonprofits that serve low-income Californians. In addition to our online and in-person trainings, LAAC provides coordination and advocacy for increased funding to support organizations like yours. Thank you.